Yes, sir. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. On behalf of Nepal Institute for International Cooperation and Engagement, it gives me a great pleasure to extend a warm welcome to the distinguished chair, fellow scholars and participants who have joined us through Zoom and are watching us live on YouTube. We are thrilled to have you join us today at International Young Scholars Summit 2020. This international forum aims to bring together rigorous and erudite young scholars from all over the world over a single platform. The aim is to create an academic space to encourage young scholars and academicians from the field of international relations, political science, diplomacy, public policy, administration, and related subfields. The conference will be held for 3 days consecutively with 30 different sessions with 2 parallel sessions, white and green rooms running simultaneously throughout the conference. The conference will feature 275 scholars from 25 different countries who will be delivering their presentations and sharing their ideas and understandings with us. The session is streaming live on our YouTube, so please feel free to share it on your social media handle with hashtag IYSS2020. This is the 21st session of the conference, and to chair and moderate this session, it's an honor to have George Cooke here with us today. Mr. George Cooke has been the Deputy Director at Bandaranaike Center for International Studies, BCIS, since January 2018. Prior to his appointment, he was a research associate at BCIS engaging in research on foreign policy, diplomacy, regionalism, and integration. A diplomat by profession, having joined the Sri Lanka Foreign Service in 2007, he has served in the Public Policy Communications Division, the Bureau of Foreign Minister, and the East Asia and Pacific Division of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Sri Lanka. In addition to an overseas posting at Embassy of Sri Lanka in Paris, he also served as the first secretary as the permanent delegation of Sri Lanka to the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO. He is also a lecturer at BCIS and University of Colombo and a visiting fellow for the Ubon Ratchathani University, Thailand. He is an alumnus of the Netherlands Institute of International Relations and a doctoral candidate at the University of Colombo. Without any further ado, let me now request George Cooke to moderate the session.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction. And let's go into our session straight away. So in our session, we're looking at the overarching topic of global governance. This year is a very important year, 2020. When we talk about global governance, the closest we come to global governance is through multilateralism. And we are marking 100th anniversary of multilateralism in 2020. So let's talk more about global governance. Let's get a whole variety of views from across the board. We have a number of participants who are joining us from different countries. And let's start. Nayantara, Shaunik, are you with us at the moment?
Nayantara, he has not joined it. We should move to second and then.
Okay, fine. Dr. Tamanna Khosla, who's a researcher, who's going to be talking about the role of civil society in global governance, and the need for power to the people and deliberative democracy. Dr. Khosla, over to you. I think we need to unmute the mic first, Dr. Khosla, and then we'll start. Yes.
Yeah. So thank you so much, and I thank Nat for inviting me for this session. And the topic which I am dealing with, the role of civil society in global governance. So to start with, it's like in the current postmodern times, we see that there has been an upgradation of civil society. More than just civil society, the focus is more in the 90s on issues such as democracy and political reforms in countries, environmental issues. And so here I would like to say what do we really understand by civil society. It might give us insight into what a democratic setup would look like in current political setup. So for example, many countries are witnessing a lot of political changes. People are asking for democracy, be it Taiwan, be it in Middle East. There have been a lot of talks about this particular issue. A lot of authoritarian governments, for example, had issues such as like, for example, Tiananmen Square in 1989. And so these issues had to be taken care of. And civil society took initiative and are taking initiative with this issue in their mind. That so it gives global civil society gives hope to the oppressed people of the world that they can get connected to global governance and through people coming together, and because of social media, there is the world is such a small place that we can immediately connect with other countries and compare and contrast what is going in their country, which is good, which is bad, and we can cooperate and we can have our voices heard. So yeah, and as Nancy Fraser would say, global civil society is a dynamic claim and counter-claim for justice that extends far beyond the discursive framework of nation-state. So it is not just the realm of nation-state which is looking at this particular issue. It is now up to the global society which will look into these aspects of global civil society and bring about changes in the contemporary world. Civil society is just not international NGOs. It is more about communicative path and deliberation taking place in UN and other international agencies and country to country deliberation. So in India, for example, this movement has taken a lot of, was started by many, like we have a culture of deliberation. And if we look at these movements, they were largely non-violent in nature. And Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi was one of the pioneers in this particular aspect, and he got independence to India. While many people were also involved, and they agreed to Gandhiji's way of thinking. Moreover, the growth of civil society in the 90s closely associated with shift in cultural and social values. The shift saw a change in emphasis from natural society to concerns about democracy. Like it's just about not just about material things. Before 90s we had a lot of issues such as on material because of communist movements and all that. So material was something which is very important for people. But now political issues are forefront, and democracy is something which is being discussed worldwide. And people who are saying, for example, in Islamic countries, many people say that this cannot be done because these cultures are against democracy. But that's not true, because in many countries movements have taken place, and so the issues of human rights have been raised. Women's issues have come up in a big way, and unlike 50s and the 60s, issues of race, language, religion have come to forefront. Not only these issues are not just in the West, but also in Latin America, Africa, and Middle East. So it's like now South Asian countries are also picking up in a big way. And if we look at other countries, for example, Pakistan, and when their people interact with Indians, they do have the same concern. So nobody is favoring terrorism out there. It's only my personal hunch is that people who are doing this are doing it out of political mileage which they gain out of it, and most politicians they have to listen to the voice of global civil society. What people have to say, their voice is rising, and social media is playing that part in this particular aspect. The best part about all these movements is that most of them are non-violent in nature. They are not being violent. Very few would be which would be violent in nature, but most of them have picked up the notion of Martin Luther King and people who have Nelson Mandela and Gandhi ji, and they have done this particular fact that we have to be non-violent. While Western support for dictators in the region has been underpinned by Oriental, so I just spoke about the fact that we should not just Orientalize Islamic countries, and they too have a voice to raise, and their people are wanting more democracy, and they are clamoring for it. Until the time that is not met, people are not going to be satisfied. So people globally are interacting in this particular aspect. So feminism, for example, one of the concerns is now becoming a global movement where women across the world are coming together and they are understanding each other's issues. They might be different, they might be same, but they are discussing issues in a certain way. Now, what are the types of global civil society movements? One of them is the political movement. Political movement is about democracy, and as I have already spoken about, we have, for example, in Israel, we had seen the democratic movement. People, if they want, can withdraw support. When consent is withdrawn, such regimes cannot survive. So, it's the power of the people which has to be garnered and which has to be nurtured. And this cannot be done by politicians. This can only be done by people to people interaction. For example, if I interact with somebody from Sudan, for example, and we learn from each other's cultures, and we understand what their civil society is like and what our civil society, cultural differences are there, but we can understand from each other's perspective. So we can learn and distribute education on this particular thing. Uh, but these many of these political situations, they can mileage their uh, they can mobilize people through fear or lack of stability or anarchy. Most of them without democracy would face anarchy, lawlessness and violence. And post it's still not post, but corona period has seen a lot of lawlessness. So it was major countries. America has seen a lot of lawlessness, and so we can't really say that it's only a Middle Eastern or a South Asian or an African concern. It's a worldwide concern where the voice of people is not heard. Then, for example, in Italy, we have this return to nuclear power is rejected in a referendum, and in Germany and Switzerland also it's been done in a big way to just move it out. And so yeah, then you have economic movements, and for the 1970s saw a lot of economic movements taking place. 1980s is a period where value-based, and 1992 value-based movements were there. 2004 anti-capitalism movements and opposition to war, and 2010 saw democracy and social justice issues being primed. These all depend on whether the merely emerging emancipatory social movements can transform themselves into political movements. So these emancipatory movements, be it environmental movements, be it economic movements, be it political movements, social movements, they have to garner political support. And that has to happen when global civil society and political activists come together and bring about change, because you have many politicians who are doing very good work, and New Zealand is one of the examples, and the Prime Minister has done amazing work during Corona period, and she is an amazing woman. So and global civil society is fixated with the idea of deliberative democracy. So till the time we do not have a dialogue across cultures and we do not agree to each other's point of view and agree to disagree, we would not be able to move beyond, and that is the thing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Khosla. You touched on some very, very relevant issues in terms of looking at the whole concept of deliberation and actually questioning whether the voice of the people has gone unheeded with some of the examples that you used. And of course, we're looking at issues concerning race and language, raising its head, not just in one part of the world, but this is becoming a global issue. Certainly, it's something that we'll come back to in terms of our discussion. So thank you for now, Dr. Khosla. We'll come back to you in the Q&A session. We will now move on to our next speaker, Suryakanta Rout, who is a student from the Pondicherry University in India, who will be focusing on China's BRI, the Millennium Development Transition of Global Governance. Suryakanta, may we move on to you right now? If you would unmute your mic so that we could commence, we could. Yes, okay, fine, perfect.
Thank you, sir, for your heartfelt comment. So I just want to give a most privileged, it is indeed most privileged for me for going through this nice, which is conducting a couple of webinars and through e-diplomacy throughout the continent. So first of all, I want to give the good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, whatever the case may be where you are. So my topic is the China's Belt and Road Initiative and its development transition in the global governance. So the China's Belt and Road Initiative, if you see the China's, is not when the started the wants to make its major motive was that they bring the community of common destiny, which is China's major harmful opportunity and major initiative was comes under this BRI project. So China, if you see the after the 2014 by the unanimous consent of the Communist Party of China and the Communist Party of Transition and the Bureau issued a English name the concept BRI, then it is concept the Belt and Road Initiative. So the global transition, if we see the current scenario of the SARS-CoV-19 and its ample devastating nature throughout the world has changed the multilateralism and the, both in dynamic concept and in and its transitions and how far we can congregate our uh, relations with a multilateral platforms in order to strengthen of this catastrophic uh, that is the devastation when the world is facing now. So China has major power which China think it is the major power we can connect throughout the world, because if we see that the COVID-19 has already changed the geopolitics and the global supply chain and the people-to-people contact through both in the hard power diplomacy and the soft power diplomacy. So, and the major superpower, if we see this major superpower has started of their decoupling and scrimmage nature with each other in the trade value with China and the US concept, and the transitions in the global governance in the inter-transitional and if we see the international and inter-transitional organizations, if we see is the major, which is the major part of the global governance. So if we are not taking the transparency of these institutions, then we may face some problems in the coming future. So if we see the major superpower in the China also just started to decoupling of its nature to with the world constitutions, I mean world institutions, the WHO and its major multilateral agreement as well. So the China think that it is an ample opportunity for the both developing and developed countries to revive their economy, because so it is already started the COVID-19 had already changed the world and its GDP to double digit to a single digit person. So it is very transit to bring into a connecting to the rail project and the tunnel, if is the major maritime security concerns and the 21st century Silk Road economic belt, which China's BRI was the major concerns on this regards. So China think that we should come across with this problem with a very transitional way. So it is also the China's Belt and Road Initiative also criticized by the Western countries. They think that the BRI project is the for the China of the China and by the China. So and it's also condemned that it is the China's Marshall Plan, which is a European. If you see the China Marshall Plan was major part of the European recovery of the European economic crisis. So there it is also criticized majorly due to of its the thing that it is also another problem, that depth of diplomacy, which China think that it is not for only China, it is throughout the continent. And if you I just want to say that China want to how to revive the developing and the developed concept in the multilateral platforms. But yes, it has some China's adamant behavior on the South China Sea. If you see the South China Sea, it is also once the critics criticize that the China wants to impede on its own versions of the law in the international platforms. So if you see the South China Sea concept, the one Philippines concept, the when the Philippines said that what the China tore its 9 lines, and it is also violating the economic zone of the major countries of East Asian countries. So in 2013, I think the Philippines put a case against the China in the International Court of Justice. So the International Court of, so after the verdict of the UN clause, then the China also later it is denied that it is not. We cannot accept this award of the judgment. So they think that the China and the major countries, they think that China also wants to impede or own its own versions of the international law and the supply chain, if it's the and the public goods. So which is major problem for the Western countries. They think that it may hit the dollar diplomacy of the China. So the China has also some problem for the ASEAN continental. So if you see the major world has changed of its through the continent due to COVID-19. So so the ASEAN century has it's now under the major. It has some strength in power because the COVID-19 majorly hit the Western countries than that of the ASEAN countries, because ASEAN countries has the major power in order to how to cope its transition throughout the world, because the China also it has some partial hesitation towards the ASEAN multilateralism, because if it's so ASEAN, the China and India, it has some disputes also in the territorial disputes and other concerns. So China also started of its influence throughout the world. It also recently it started when the trade war was happening with the USA. So China started of its good relation with the US allies, which and US allies with the concept of the Irans. So they also started also in the Gulf countries. They started to the energy security, energy resources to access the energy resources. So China's BRI project, if you see the China itself constitutes the 7% of its world population and 55% world's gross national product and 75% of global energy resources. So which China think it is an ample opportunity for us. We should go through this long-standing development of our economy and the concept of disrupt of supply chains, and it has also changed the people-to-people contact. If you see the China's also it has faced up with some domestic insecurity of the Hong Kong issue, if the Uyghur in Xinjiang regions or the ethnic violations. So major concerns of the international organization also, they think that the China started of its in one territory started its humiliation to their peoples, and they also started to the ethnic violations. So China think it is not for China to connect throughout the world uh, in its policy strategy. So if you see the Chinese policy is very far reaching. They're very much adamant over their leadership. If the after the post-Mao period, if the Jinping his visionary is very far reaching than that of the other countries. It also creates a new normal between the uh, Western and the ASEAN countries. And if you see the unilateralism of the China versus the multilateralism of the others. So China, its concept has changed the world. If you see the China, it's also started with development in order to counterbalance the taller diplomacy of China, the USA. So China, they have major innovative and the and it also pushed the world into a fourth industrial revolutions by developing of its technology. If it's the technology and the computing, then artificial intelligence and the optical fiber, then Huawei projected technologically with the 5G connections. So it started to develop the overall development in order to bring the China. So China think that after China has also the China as well as the ASEAN countries also has the major role, and they have also the experience about the when the 2018 crisis of the crisis happened, and when the China's economy and the ASEAN economy was held to counter the to achieve the dollar of the US. So they think it is an opportunity for China to wants to give a platform to the world comes under these single platforms. We can transit the world into air, but it has some territorial, and it is also climate change and the energy security concerns, which the major countries don't deny to the access of the China's concepts. Yes, it has changed the development. We can say the Millennium Development Transition, we cannot say the positive. It has some negative concept of the China. So China think that it is has we are not getting to the sovereignty of the others with the when Indian concerns in the China-Pakistan economic corridor, which passes the India Pakistan occupied Kashmir. So they think that India think that it is also violating the Indian integrity and sovereignty. So the security concern and the energy security and the climate change. So it is also major drawback with the major countries and in environmentalists. They think that it's a major problem for China, the world countries. So I don't think it's a major problem. So we should comes under the time has come. We should comes to the this project in a better transitional way and the transparent way. So otherwise we cannot face the problems of this situations. So I just want to lastly I just want to say, so it is has times to come. We should congregate with China with a calibrated approach of development, which China think. Otherwise, China it is think that it is China's ample opportunity during these times to hit the dollar diplomacy power. So it is so if the ASEAN as well as the Western countries, we should come a calibrated development. We can come with the China in order to develop a better world for the coming human civilization. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Suryakanta. Thank you for your intervention. Certainly, development needs to be the overarching goal in terms of countries also benefiting in the process and making sure that it is a mutually beneficial arrangement that occurs. So thank you. Thank you once again for your intervention. And we'll come back to you during the Q&A session.
So,
Our next participant, yes?
sorry, I just wants to say something, but unfortunately, I have the academic exam, so I am unable to. I will stay in with that, but
Sure.
unable to speak. But I will put my email ID in this Q&A box. Then,
Fine.
if
You
anyone
can
have
keep
the
it in the
questions,
box.
then we will
Anyone can
okay.
email you. Yes. Okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you very much, Suryakanta. So our next speaker will be Aarushi, who's a student at the University of Delhi in India. Aarushi is going to be speaking about COVID-19 and the legitimacy crisis, and focusing on a particular international organization, being the World Health Organization. Aarushi, over to you.
Thank you, sir, for the introduction, and good morning to one and all present here. My paper is titled as COVID-19 and Legitimacy Crisis in the World Health Organization, WHO. So as we know that the WHO is a specialized agency of United Nations, which is concerned with the issues of international health. And it is a directing and coordinating authority that provides leadership on global health matters. But there are voices that are claiming that the organization has fallen short on its legitimacy. Like the world is experiencing a global health crisis today, the organization is suffering from a legitimacy crisis. Although we know that the organization declared the coronavirus outbreak as a public health emergency of international concern on 30th January 2020, and it also announced the name for the new disease as COVID-19, yet there are voices that are claiming that this organization has fallen short on its accountability. So my paper seeks to argue that the WHO is going through a limited legitimacy crisis, and it is not an overall legitimacy crisis. Although we expect more from the organization during this time, but my paper argues that it has done enough of what is there in its capacity. So before we move forward and see what are the claims which are being put on the organization, we need to understand the meaning of the term legitimacy and what all are the factors that affect any organization's legitimacy. So briefly, legitimacy can be understood one as normative legitimacy that talks about whether the organization is working according to the principles which are laid down in its constitution or not. And the second is the empirical legitimacy. So as the word suggests, empirical, it basically means experimentation. So the organization is going to adopt certain procedures, and then we are going to see whether the procedures or the processes adopted by the organization were legitimate or not. And also there are other factors that affect the organization's legitimacy. They are the performance, what was the performance of the organization when it implemented those specific procedures or processes. And then also it depends on the way the organization responded to the challenges which were ahead of it. So when we talk about the World Health Organization, the why it is being questioned for its legitimacy, the one thing is very much clear that the first question is arising because of the kind of inclination the WHO is showing towards China during this pandemic. So as the report suggests that the outbreak of the virus started in this country, and that too quite early, but China gave its first report only on the last day of 2019. So while the world was still questioning the act of China because it was suppressing the whistleblowers who were giving information about the virus, we could see the Director General of the World Health Organization applauding China for its efforts of being the front runner in handling the pandemic and providing reliable information to the world. So what this organization came to be seen as at that time was that it is certainly biased towards a particular country, and the questions of illegitimacy or the legitimacy started coming up, saying that the organization is being illegitimate and completely biased, and when it is dealing with China, it is doing a cost benefit analysis. But we need to check the normative and empirical legitimacy here. So when we talk about the normative legitimacy, we need to see what the constitution says. In this case, when the organization is dealing with China, we can certainly argue that they are showing excessive appreciation, and they are in their favor, or they are being biased, and they are not extracting enough information, and the leadership should have been firm. But we need to consider this, that the constitution of this particular organization is something which tells that the organization cannot stand alone, and it is dependent on its member state for the organization for extracting information. And when you are dealing with a country which everybody knows that certainly works under closed door or behind closed doors, so we need to a certain kind of appreciation which was given to them was needed. So we can say the normative legitimacy of the organization was somewhere protected here, but it fell short on the empirical legitimacy, in the sense that it gave excessive appreciation to the country, which was not required. And also it was against the expectations of people, because generally people expected the organization to be little firm, to be little strict while dealing with with the country while extracting information. But that is something which was missing there, because they provided excessive information, excessive appreciation to the country for being the front runner. So the expectations of people led to the affection, or led to the legitimacy of the organization being affected. The another thing which is taking rounds is that the organization declared the spread of this virus as a public health emergency of international concern quite late. So while we know that the organization stick to its normal procedures of setting up an emergency committee and then assessing the outbreaks, but we also know that the members could not reach a collective vote, because somewhere the voices are coming that the Director General was backed by Chinese government during his elections to the post. But we cannot forget the thing that today, sitting on our sofas, watching television, reading newspapers, it is really easy to say that they didn't take decision on time. But at that time, with little reliable information from China, this is the least they could do. So these were the main reasons for not bringing the declaration so late. So we cannot question the normative legitimacy of the organization here. Empirical legitimacy can somewhere on one hand and the other hand can be questioned, but obviously not the normative legitimacy. It is doing what's there written in the constitution of the organization and the procedures that the organization has to adopt. The other case is of the withdrawal of the US from the WHO because of now the US gave this argument of, there's increasing Chinese control of the organization. So which resulted in people believing that, something is really wrong with this organization there because, such a strong member is withdrawing from the organization. But I would like to argue that US claim was more on delegitimizing the organization, not just on the basis of the way the organization was behaving with China, but also it was somewhere related to how the president of America, Mr. Donald Trump, could not reduce the death figures of America due to his failed policy measures. So my paper argues that it was shifting the blame that was working here mostly, as legitimacy beliefs of people do get affected by what the strong member states are saying. So even though these withdrawals could have happened just to protect their images in the domestic walls, but it came out to be affecting the legitimacy of the organization. So I would conclude by saying that the way to respond to the situation is obviously in the control of the WHO, because it is asking the states and it is directing states to, to detect, to prevent, and to respond to the pandemic. But the way to extract information and other necessary details and also to give information is certainly in the control of the member states. So that's why I argue that the normative legitimacy in one way or the other has been actually protected by the organization, but the expectations of people, the withdrawals of the states, maybe because of their own reasons, are something which is affecting the empirical legitimacy. Although this is how the organization could have responded to this pandemic or the challenge ahead of it, because it is certainly unprecedented for these organizations as well. So while questions are raised on the credibility of these organizations, the organization are doing their work and they're informing the states regarding the procedures or the methods they can adopt to stop the transmission chain of virus. So although we ask for more work from these to be done in these times, we cannot forget that the reforms are still there on the table of these organizations, which are now acting as a hindrance to their work and resources. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Aarushi. You raised some very valid points in terms of understanding the situation from a global perspective and understanding how it evolved at that particular point. It is unprecedented. We've experienced this in the past, but of course, we've got to understand the apparatus that we have now is dealing with the situation now. And as you said, it's sometimes very easy for us to sit in the comfort of our homes and pass judgment without understanding the ground reality. And this is where we have to always focus on that bigger picture of the fact that if not for organizations of that nature, what would we have done? Yes, there are certainly question marks and areas for improvement and openness. But of course, this is where the United Nations, which is also marking an important anniversary this year under the framework of global governance, is an organization which has done tremendous amount of work. And the world is at a very different place owing to organizations such as the United Nations. So we'll come back to that discussion in a short while, as soon as we move into the Q&A. So thank you once again, Aarushi. Thank you. So we are moving next to our speaker from the Central China Normal University, who is a PhD candidate, Benjamin Mwadi Makengo, who will be speaking about conservative progressives' power games under COVID-19, why it is the progressives who appeared the most jostled in Africa. Welcome on board, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks so much for the kind introduction. And first of all, I would like to thank the organizer of this great event. And the topic of my paper I'm going to share with you is conservative and progressive power game under COVID-19. Why is the progressive who appear the most jostled in Africa? And I'm going to focus on global communication. And my first point is that since the very beginning of the 21st century, with the rise of China, and of course, also the increasing resurrection of Russia power, and also the decline of the West, power. We are assisting in a power games of conservative and progressive in the international arena, and is the game of those who want to conserve their power and influence in the world, and those who pushing for change. And of course, is the conservative who want to conserve them power. And of course, is led by the United States. And the progressive, they are pushing for change in the current international arena, the structure dominated by the West. And of course, the progressive, this bloc is dominated by China. But this area, this period of COVID-19, this competition, power games between these two blocks, conservative and progressive, is increasing. COVID-19 just came to increase this competition between these two blocks, conservative and progressive. And they are competing everywhere, many areas in the world. In the South China Sea, we can see the competition. And of course, in Africa also, we can see in this time the competition between those two blocks, conservative and progressive, also in Africa. But my point is that if we focus about global communication dimension, the stakes of this competition of those two blocks is to delegitimize another. The conservative, they are looking out to delegitimize the progressive. Of course, the progressive also, they are doing what they say. And not just delegitimizing, but also isolating them. They are trying to isolate some and just to win more allies or more friends, of course, in Africa. But my point is that if we looking in this time of power game conservative and progressive in Africa, is the progressive who appear the most jostled in Africa. And the question is why? Why is the progressive who appear the most jostled in Africa? And my point is quite simple here. It's quite simple. I point that is just because of the communication advantages of the conservative over the progressive. If we look at the capability of the conservative of United States and its allies, the capacity of the United States to communicate or to share information in the world, in Africa, is more powerful than of China with its friends in Africa. And this we can explain it so easily in the colonial link. Of course, United States is support with its ally, the former colonial power, and the communication is more integrated in Africa. And they have, of course, more means than China to communicate in Africa. And when China try to communicate in Africa, the impact of China communication in Africa is not really strong than the impact of the conservative United States and with its allies communication in Africa. Just when the conservative United States try to bring up the idea of the origins of COVID-19 and also the idea of the management of COVID-19 in China. And you can see in Africa, most of the people, most of the country pursued with that accusation and suspicion of the United States against China, of course. And that is just because of advantages of United States and its allies communication in Africa. Them communication ability in Africa is more powerful than the Chinese communication in Africa. And of course, just like I said, the communication capability of the conservatives are more powerful, of course, because of the colonial link. Colonial link, not just the colonial link, but of course, because also of the public diplomacy. The sum of the public diplomacy of the conservatives seem to be more powerful than of China. Just think about the languages. You know, most of the African countries, they are used to speak French or English or Portuguese or other language. But you know, the Chinese, they are more conservative with Chinese language. And most of the Africans, they don't know China or Chinese language. And it's just what, like, when the West gives some communication in Africa, is more pursued to the African people. That the reason why in this period you can see the Chinese legitimacy in Africa is reducing just because of communication problem. The West, when they are accusing China, the communication of ability of the West is more powerful than North China and its allies. But that it doesn't mean that the Chinese, they are going to lose this game, this power game, conservative and progressive in Africa. No, it doesn't mean. Because this game, conservative and progressive power game, is not just focused about communication, but also is also focused about economy. Because we are moving now from communication to economy. And in economical dimension, of course, we can see how China is more engaged in Africa in economic dimension. And that's the reason why we need to see the future. We're looking to the future to see how it will going on this conservative and progressive power game in Africa. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for that intervention. You raised some very vital points there in terms of understanding a much bigger theoretical perspective of how we understand power games, and you looked at a very important example coming out of Africa and relations with China. So thank you very much, Benjamin, for your intervention. We will come back to you during the Q&A. And open up for discussion. We will now go to our next speaker, who is Krishna Kumar Verma, a PhD candidate at the Jawaharlal Nehru University in India. Krishna will be speaking on least developing countries and access to medical products crisis during COVID-19. Krishna, over to you.
Thank you, sir, for wonderful session organized on the multilateralism, though we are facing the crisis of multilateralism across the world on many other issues. So apart from that, my presentation is located on the title called Least Developing Countries and Access to Medical Product Crisis during COVID-19. So what I am doing in this paper is that I'm dividing into two parts. The first looks into the the crisis which have come in the front of essential medical products, and the secondly is the access to medicine. So we we have already witnessed it that, during the coronavirus period, and we are currently facing that, like most of the advanced country of the world, they have imposed restriction, export restriction on many medical products and other essential uh, services which were required to facilitate or to contain the coronavirus disease across the world. But why does this is more important for the least developing countries to understand this problem? So in the case of least developing countries, they are the one who have the least hold of the technology in regards to the medical product, and also also lack of manufacturing capability in those areas. Before going into that, there's one study which I will like to mention, that we see not only about the coronavirus, but in the case of many other um, virus-based the spread of the diseases, and among them we find that the most of the diseases are being located into some of the the least developing countries, where they face a really a bigger crisis than any other country in the world. Why do they face? So in regards to the medical product, there is a lack of technology, we already see it, and though there are many other mechanisms which have come up and has been tried by countries to build it, but they are unable to access this technology into their country because of the many difficulties. Among them, there is a financial difficulties. They have less skilled researcher, other the required labor force. Also, they have very small economies, so it really does not incentivize the manufacturing company of the global world to really sell their product or to prioritize the sale of the product in this country. Next, the lack of essential infrastructure. So for example, like in the case of some of the vaccines which need to be injected into anybody who is the patient, in regards to that there is a need of refrigerator. So if a country which does not have an essential facility like electricity or other, the refrigerator or other, better medical system, so then in that country, this kind of facility won't be available. Next, I'll like to talk about, the why there is a crisis of access to medicine. We have already seen that, it was United States who had imposed the imposed restriction on the export of medical product. Among there were many essential medicines which were used for treating coronavirus, were for some point of time they were on the hold and they were not exported to the country across the world. Among them, even the India was a part. For some point of period, they had also imposed restriction. So it's not only the developed country who had imposed it, but there were some other developing countries who are having manufacturing capability has imposed such a restriction. So in regards to TRIPS, in regards to assistive medicine, there is a global trading rules which had been established at the WTO, which is called TRIPS agreement. Though in regards to the patent, which is the main hurdle to assess the medicine, is not implemented, or least developing countries are under no obligation to implement that agreement. But this does not really remove the hurdle before the least developing country to access the medicine. Why does it happen? uh, I have already said that there is a lack of manufacturing capability, there is a less financial resources, and so all this makes it very difficult for the least developing country to assess this all thing. So in regards to that, before, like there was one case which I like to point out here, that when AIDS crisis happened in South Africa, where they registered at the WTO and a dispute began between the alliance of multilateral pharmaceutical companies against South Africa. So after that, a Doha declaration came into, and that had removed lots of hurdles which was faced by least developing countries. But this really did not resolve the hurdles before least developing countries. Why does it happen so? Well, it had just resolved the crisis of issuing a compulsory licensing for a medicine which is under patent. But that's not the only hurdle before LDC. LDCs have a lack of manufacturing capacity. So how will they assess it? So for that, there was a mention in the Doha Declaration to work out a compromise, and later on 30th August, they worked out a compromise where this declaration allowed it that the developing countries or other any developed country can uh, issue a compulsory licensing to export a patented drug under that law to the least developing country. But that's not a very easy task, because for that there are several the condition which had been put into place. The first for the importing country, second for the exporting country. And well, in the case of LDCs, the importing conditions are not very significant or not very restrictive. But in the case of the developing country, who will be the exporting manufacturing country, so for them it's has been very difficult to really manage this difficulty, because we have seen it like every year there is a report which comes out by United States USTR, which points out which are the countries which have a very bad the patent regime or IPR regime, or who need to be monitored, who need to be threatened, who need to be punished for that. So this makes it very difficult for both the developing countries and least developing countries to produce and export essential medicine. Thirdly, there is a coming out a deadline for the least developing country, which is called transitional period. So the deadline has been set by 2033. So by that time, if this transition period is not extended, which is really meant for, like, whose meaning is that the least developing country does not have to implement the patent regime into their own country because of this transition period at the WTO. But if this deadline expires, or there is another provision which says that least developing country will graduate from this provision. So among that, the most advanced country which seems to be going to graduate will be Bangladesh, which is I think only a manufacturing country among the least developing country which have a solid generic manufacturing base in their own country. So that's how the bigger countries or the developed country are pushing the least developing countries or those countries who will be making the essential product available for the poor people or the least developing countries are getting difficult day by day because of the cartel of developed countries, bigger pharmaceutical companies, and the elite groups of the world. Thank you a lot.
Thank you very much, Krishna. Thank you. You once again raised issue which has become very, very critical, especially with COVID. Of course, it's something that has been around for quite some time in terms of looking at legitimacy within this particular sector and how least developing countries are able to gain access to such products. And of course, this debate has been going for some time, but it was highlighted that much more during COVID. So thank you. We will come back to you during the Q&A session, and we will now move on to our next speaker this morning, who is Damni Kain, a student from the University of Delhi in India, who is going to be speaking on revisiting the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, engaging in a green post-COVID-19 recovery. Damni, can we turn over to you?
Am I audible?
You are audible, but we can't see you. Yes, you're audible.
Right. Okay,
can we
okay.
hear you?
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
yes, yes. Okay, right.
Yeah.
We can hear you
Okay.
and see you now. Fine.
Yeah. Hello and a very good morning to all members present in the session 21 of the International Young Scholars Summit 2020 conducted by NIICE, Nepal. And the title of my paper is Revisiting the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, Engaging in a Green Post-COVID Recovery. Through the course of my paper, I bring out three key important arguments. And my first argument is this. The COVID-19 pandemic has transcended boundaries, and it has transcended boundaries not only in terms of the virus of COVID-19 cases, but also in its ramifications and consequential effects on the political, economic, social, cultural, and environmental spheres. So any effort for the post-COVID recovery would require essentially a global cooperation. There have been talks all this while about receding back of globalization, but I think something which would be thought in terms of a very nationalist sense or very country-specific scenario would not be very helpful for a post-COVID recovery, which requires an interdependence and a global cooperation. I feel that in this line, something like a waxing nationalism could be very dangerous for not only in managing the COVID recovery at this point of time, but also for the future. So any amount of efforts for post-COVID-19 recovery requires an international cooperation and a global cooperation altogether. Secondly, we need to prioritize the idea of sustainable development, because at this point of human history, at this juncture, we stand at a very pivotal and a very critical point from where we can either go back to the old idea of development or can actually rethink our idea of development and security. And the very idea of sustainable development was greatly elucidated in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And this kind of connects to the first argument that I made about global cooperation, since the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, in a way, provide us with a framework provide us with a framework of global cooperation, as well as highlight the importance of sustainable development. The third argument of my paper is this, that COVID-19 pandemic kind of provides a two-way mechanism for us. On the one hand, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals kind of provide a framework for a resilient and a healthy and a green post-COVID recovery. While on the other hand, if we engage in a well thought out plan of a post-COVID recovery, then it kind of accelerates the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So it's kind of a two-way mechanism, and both of them are kind of integrated, related, and helping each other. So I'll just go in more substantial detail of the United Nations. So I would want to highlight that the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal have showed an inherent sagacity in the moment of this pandemic, And I would like to quote UNITA's executive director Nikhil Seth, who rightly remarked that the pandemic's disproportionate effects on marginalized communities indicate that the principles on which the sustainable developmental goals were found are very sound. COVID-19 reinforces the importance of green economy approaches of inclusivity, and partnership is needed more than ever. In a similar vein, UNDP Administrator Achim Steiner also iterated the fact that as we work through response and recovery from the shocks of the pandemic, the Sustainable Development Goals need to be designed into the DNA of global recovery. And I would like to here highlight the key points of the 2030 agenda, which was laid as a part of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, where in 2015, a joint agreement was signed between the 193 UN member states. This agenda included 17 sustainable development goals across the social, economic, and environmental dimensions of sustainable development. The goals provided a framework for shared action for people, planet, and prosperity. These targets are global in nature and universally applicable, taking into account different national realities, capacities, and levels of development, respecting national priorities and policies. And the SDGs call for an international collaborative partnership for three dimensions of sustainable development, that is economic growth, environment sustainability, and social inclusion. So the entire idea of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals reflects a very solid international collaborative partnership and global cooperation for achieving equity, for achieving resilience on the matters of sustainability, economic growth, and political and social upliftment of the marginalized communities. So we already have a kind of a framework which is global in the sense which prioritizes a global cooperation. And during the pandemic, it becomes important and also easy for us to just follow the pattern which was already available, because any amount of benefits, for instance, in the term of environment, if we attain any amount of environmental benefits, for example, the pollution has gone down during the pandemic, but those benefits would only be short term. If we do not focus on real matters of equity, if we do not focus on developing a sustainable model of development, and if we do not focus on important ideas of justice and peace in the society. Now, I'll just highlight that the green post-COVID recovery requires revisiting sustainable development goals, which aimed at no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, innovation in industries and infrastructure, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, climate action, and partnership for the goals. So these were the 17 sustainable development goals which were already there. And much of the key policy recommendations for a green post-COVID recovery, which has been given by various international organizations such as the WHO, World Bank, IMF, and IRENA, and many other NGOs of international stature, have kind of reflected what has already been mentioned in the 2015 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals as an agenda for 2030. For example, the WHO provided 6 prescriptions resembling the environmental goals of Agenda 2030, which asks to protect and preserve the source of human health, that is nature. Economies rely on environmental health, and destruction of wildlife by humans are the source of 60% of infectious diseases originating from animals. Climate resilient health, implementation of WHO chemicals roadmap 2017, and international health regulations and sustainable infrastructure can reduce the loss of ecosystems. So these were now kind of 6 implementation prescriptions that the WHO recommended, and clearly resemble the environmental prioritization of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. In the same way, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres called for the inclusion of climate action, which is the United Nations Sustainable Developmental Goal 13, in the COVID-19 recovery, and demarcated 6 climate actions like investing in green jobs and businesses, financing green economies, incorporating assessments of climate risk into financial system, public policy making, and infrastructure as vital plans. And continuing this, the IMF Fiscal Affairs Department also rightly said that COVID crisis won't change the climate, but the response will. In the same regard, it recommended fiscal policy makers a green recovery by boosting climate smart infrastructure, avoiding carbon intensive investment, raising carbon taxes, eliminating fossil fuel subsidies. International Renewable Energy Agency also offered policy recommendations for achieving, a set of recommendations for a more sustainable post-COVID recovery. So, in totality, I think that since we stand at a very critical juncture of human history at this point of time, it is very important for us to work in a global partnership, in a global cooperation, in matters of global cooperation, and to avoid certain restricted understanding, which kind of makes us function in a very nationalistic approach, focusing on the countries only, and because this could lead to very dangerous post-COVID recovery measures, for example, like I mentioned, vaccine nationalism and things like that. And it is very important for us to revisit the old documents that we already have in place. For example, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 2015, it is a long 15-year plan for 2030 agenda, and it is important for us in order for a green and resilient, healthy post-COVID recovery. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Damni. You raised once again another critical issue in terms of looking at this global partnership. We also sometimes fall by the way in terms of understanding the synergical effect of this cooperation. I mean, the synergy of participants, stakeholders coming together really makes a huge impact. And so thank you for raising this, especially when we're talking about a green post-COVID-19 recovery. You really wanted to highlight that particular fact. So thank you, Damni. We'll come back to you during the Q&A part of the discussion. We will now move to Sri Lakshmi, who is a student at St. Joseph's College in India, who's going to be speaking on green building transformers, agents of sustainable change against global warming in urban landscapes. Sri Lakshmi, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. Yeah.
Okay, fine, perfect.
Hi, everyone. So my topic is going to be a little different from what all of you spoke about. Really interesting talks, by the way. I'm going to focus on global warming as an issue over here. And so the thing is, when it comes to an issue like global warming, it isn't respecting boundaries or sovereignty or suzerainty or any of those things, right? It's an issue of global transcendence. It goes beyond borders. It's a transboundary thing. And it's a very crucial one right now, considering the climate crisis that we are currently facing. Right, so it's also especially important that cities kind of transform to be more environment friendly rather than exploitative in nature, so that we can support and minimize our impacts on the environment and our ecological footprints, right? So here I'm going to talk about green buildings being agents of sustainable change against global warming in urban landscapes. So one of the basic things considered necessary for our survival is shelter. And this is found in the form of houses, bungalows, apartments, and any other form of dwellings that we reside in, right? So we spend a lot of our time indoors. We do a lot of our activities indoors. And this is safe to say at least very true for cities. Construction is a major economic activity, but it is also one with major environmental impacts. And this is especially so in industrialized countries. Let me tell you how. Land that is barren, or land that is used for agriculture or forest land, or even water bodies are cleared, dug up, flattened, and covered with concrete and asphalt and other building materials like metals, rocks, and sand that are obtained from natural resources to make it a place for construction, right? And these construction materials like metals, rocks, and sand, and whatever that we use are extracted from our environment through the processes of mining and quarrying. Now, once extracted, these raw materials are transported by trucks and other means of transportation to factories or industrial plants, where they're further processed and produced into building materials like cement, bricks, steel bars, glass, and all of that, right? Which are again further moved to these construction sites so that the construction can begin. Now, these procedures and processes are heavily energy dependent, and around 10% of the overall energy used in an industrialized country just purely goes into this. And this energy that we use to extract, these raw materials, process them, and send them to the construction sites, this energy is called embodied energy, which comprises 10%, as I said, of the energy used in an industrialized country. Now, we also use these energy further in buildings, right? I mean, to switch on the lights, or let's say, due to the increased, due to global warming and the increase in our temperatures, we probably also use more air conditioners to cool the air to achieve thermal comfort, or let's say to refrigerate our food, to use our washing machine, pumps, and all of that. So this energy required to keep all these electrical and electronic equipments accounts for around 30 to 40% of the total energy used in an industrialized country. And this energy is called operational energy. So sometimes these energy demands may actually be really unnecessary, though some might actually be necessary. And I say unnecessary because we have this tendency to just switch on the fan and lights and just leave it there even if you're not using it. Or we might also have the tendency to switch on lights when it's not even necessary, when there's daylight, right? Or we just keep the TV on and don't watch it and just like go into the kitchen and cook something. So all this energy is just wasted. And sadly, this energy that is wasted actually accounts for about 5 to 10% of the 30 to 40% that we use, right? And so that's like basically 1/5 of the energy, of the operational energy wasted. And to make this picture more dramatic, we still use non-renewable resources to meet most of our energy demands, like coal, natural gas, petroleum. And after combustion, these raw materials release harmful toxins into the air, like carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, and nitrogen oxides into the air. So some pollutants like carbon dioxide and methane are the key causes of the greenhouse effect, which some of you may be knowing about. It's the trapping of the energy within the atmosphere, causing global warming, right? And now global warming naturally results in the rise of the average temperatures, rise of sea levels, melting of glaciers, among many other things. Right, so this increase in the average global temperature leads us to use even more energy. Like I said, like if it's too hot, we want to switch on the AC, we want to switch on the fan, and that leads to more energy consumption, right? So we also use air-conditioned cars to travel. We prefer air-conditioned trains to travel, and that is simply because it's too hot outside. And we're also not doing simple activities like just walking to the supermarket or just cycling over, because again, it's too hot and we're not going to be comfortable doing it. The temperature isn't really that, it's not really that welcoming to be outside, right? So buildings in themselves are also one of the major contributors towards warming of the planet. And this is because the construction materials that we use in buildings can actually be harmful for the environment. Like if you use titanium, it's a reflective metal, right? So some urban spaces that are located, let's say, where there are titanium building present, right? So these fully polished and reflective metals tend to be subject to glare, and therefore, which cause the rise in the average temperature. Let me give you an example of that. The Walkie Talkie Tower in London, with its concave glazed facade, concentrates and reflects solar radiation. So this caused visual discomfort to pedestrians, and also some people reported of their cars melting when they parked it in the vicinity. So I'm going to talk more about the drawbacks of this kind of architecture on living inside as well. Since we spend a lot of our times indoors, buildings need to be able to provide us good quality of air, a sustainable temperature so that we have thermal comfort inside the house, good living conditions. But unfortunately, this is not true in most cases. Buildings are designed and constructed in a way which create poor environmental quality indoors. And this is also really harmful because it includes trapping of chemicals and biological contaminants like pesticides, suspended particles, gases, air fresheners, bacteria, viruses. Now, this is especially true for today's coronavirus world, because the coronavirus has been, I mean, it has been reported that ACs can trap these virus particles, and that's why it's not safe to use ACs. Also, if you've read procedures, protocols, precautions to take care during the coronavirus, I mean, if you're outside, that is, be outdoors. Like if you're meeting with people, be outdoors. Don't be indoors, because indoors, it can cause more chance, it can increase the chances of catching the virus, whereas outdoors, you have less chances of catching the virus, right? So apart from the coronavirus aspect of it, these effects in general, like living inside a building and the negative effects that it can cause, in general, can cause a very harmful effect on the human health. And that is feeling of discomfort, uh, dry eyes, asthma, dry cough, dry skin, inability to concentrate, fatigue, headache, nausea, allergies, and worse. Uh, Also, if a lot of you can relate to this, right now, since we are all working from home or we are taking classes online, we are spending a lot of our times inside. And so for me, I used to have I took a lot of time to get adjusted to screens because I'm not used to sitting in front of screens that much, right? So dry cough, dry eyes, all of that is a very common symptom when you're spending most time indoors, and headache and all of that, right? So this actually has this is actually like a legitimate thing, because it can also lead to this syndrome called sick building syndrome. So in a scenario where more than 20% of the building's residents are complaining about these symptoms for more than 2 weeks, and if these symptoms are relieved as soon as they leave the building, then the building is called a sick building, and the tenant's condition is called a sick building syndrome. All right, so now how can we employ better strategies to reduce all of this? Basically, you have to, okay, I'm going to give you an example. Let's say we are in a cold country and we want to use the winter sun to trap in more heat so that we have some thermal comfort inside our houses, right? So then we'll need to orient the building's front and its windows to face the sun. That is the south in the northern hemisphere and the north in the southern hemisphere. So where abundant, solar radiation can actually look after a large proportion of the building's heating needs. And it's also a renewable source of energy. For summer nights, especially in hot countries, and especially, so I live in Goa, and so for this weather, it is vital to trap in some cool breeze to achieve thermal comfort. So for that, it is important that the windows are placed in where the air comes in from, right, towards the windward side. So also air movement through the building is more efficient when there's cross ventilation, so implying the need for windows on both the windward and the leeward sides. Also, in a hot country, we'd also try to keep shaded windows so that we prevent capturing too much heat, which will again cause discomfort. Now, to take advantage of our natural processes or elements like the sun or the breeze, the building needs to be able to store this energy and also use this energy efficiently. So windows are very vital to maintaining the air supply. And for instance, they need to be operable. So openable windows allow more ventilation, shaded on the outside to prevent overheating on the inside. And they also need to be airtight so that we avoid energy loss. So this is a very key part of building structure. Also, I'm going to introduce this concept of green roofs and green facades, which have been coming up lately. So using plants as an outer layer on the building or on the roofs actually helps achieve indoor comfort. And that is because the plants use the energy, the sun's heat, for photosynthesis. So therefore, it creates like an insulating layer and does not allow the heat to come inside, right? At least not much. So green roofs and terrace gardens also provide like sort of like a little green outdoor in a city, which is especially hard to find, and it's kind of nice. So, but again, you have to be very careful in choosing the plants according to the climate and region to avoid overuse of water and compatibility towards the environment. So a cost benefit analysis of such solutions is very important, along with the fact that the environmental cost should also be low. Some building standards and assessment tools have been developed across the world, like LEED, Leadership in Energy and Environment Design, USA, BREEAM, Building Research Establishment Environment Assessment Method, UK, CASB, Comprehensive Assessment System for Built Environment Efficiency in Japan, and more such things. Now, it is very important to be very regional in your approach. Though this is a global crisis, it is important to be regional in your approach because temperature varies, the topography varies, climate varies, and therefore we need to be ensuring that our structures are in sync with our outdoor environment to make the most of it, and therefore create a better environment for people and help the environment itself. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sri Lakshmi. We've got to, for sake of time, move to our next speaker because we're running a bit over time right now. Just a small announcement to be made. If you have any questions, please put them on the group chat. We will be taking it up for discussion after our next speaker. And we are happy that we have Darlene Estrada, a student at the University of the Philippines, Diliman, who will be speaking on small state, big interests, probing Philippine interests and agency in BRI engagements. Darlene, can we move over to you, please?
Hello, everyone. Hi, sir. Can you hear me po?
Yes, we can.
Good day, everyone. Again, I'm Darlene Estrada, a graduate student from the Asian Center of the University of the Philippines. Let me just share my slides. There. So my paper is titled Small State, Big Interests, Probing Philippine Interests and Agency in BRI Engagements. In line with this session's global governance theme, I would like to contextualize my presentation on the reality that with the BRI, China is forging a new form of economic cooperation and global governance model, one that is hinged on bilateral relations as pathways to engagement. But as the BRI rolled out, majority of the narratives have regarded China as the dominating force behind BRI project implementation and regarded small partner states as passive actors, which I think is problematic because it's oversimplistic and the situation is much more complex than it seems. These small states, by the way, I refer to small states as those relatively weaker to a great power such as China. So these small states exercise agency and actually act in accordance with their interests. And this is evident in the cases of Southeast Asian countries such as Myanmar, Malaysia, Indonesia, among others, who have pushed for terms that they want for their specific projects. So that said, I argue that small states are not merely passive actors in the BRI. And I will try to demonstrate this by showing the case of the Philippines and showing that the actions of the government, together with the dynamics of various domestic actors, are key in determining how the BRI implementation will turn out. As for the relevance of my study, I believe that the narratives that fail to account for the experiences of the small states hide important lessons and which other small states could learn from in maximizing their engagements in the BRI. And just a disclaimer, I understand that the topic touches on Alexander Wen's agent structure debate in the international relations, and I fully acknowledge China's indispensable role in the issue. But for this specific paper, I want to highlight the role of the small state, given that seeing that this is not given that much attention. So just a brief background, the Philippines officially participated in the BRI in 2018 after signing the MOU on BRI cooperation. And this resulted in the signing of a whole lot of other agreements, MOUs and MOAs, and an investment pledge amounting to an estimated $24 billion was committed. And these are some of the ongoing projects in the Philippines. So let's go straight to the discussion. To demonstrate the case of the Philippines, I did a bit of process tracing to pinpoint the important phases throughout the BRI implementation. And the list I have here, it's not exhaustive, but I think these are worth highlighting to support my argument. So first we have, in terms of project selection, so even before the Philippines officially participated in the BRI, the government had maintained a list of high-impact infrastructure projects. And the BRI projects were chosen from this list. So these projects are expected to enhance connectivity, promote economic growth, not just in the urban center, but also outside Metro Manila, and overall to contribute to the infrastructure development goal of the current administration under the Build, Build, Build program. So other than selection, we have project negotiation. The government also negotiated provisions on transparency and labor requirements. So in the case of the Chico River irrigation pump project, the government was able to negotiate the inclusion of a confidentiality clause that will allow documents to be made public using Philippine laws. So the government also negotiated labor requirements, and the result was that majority of the workers are Filipinos. But of course, there are still Chinese engineer specialists included in the project. And lastly, in terms of project construction or implementation, well, the Philippine government, just like any other government, is not monolithic at all. So you have groups within the government, and also the government is in constant interaction with groups outside the government. So with different interests, different inclinations on the BRI. So in the case of the Philippines, we have the bureaucratic elites who are very much capable of delaying, hindering, or even supporting BRI projects. For example, the Kaliwa Dam has faced a number of Senate and congressional hearings questioning its effects on the surrounding community and some of its technicalities. Second, we also have the local elites. For example, in the case of the Intramuros Bridge in Manila, you have a local influential family questioning the purpose of the bridge. Of course, we have the civil societies and the local communities with whom the government coordinates with and asks consent from before they commence the building of the project. So what do we get from this? We see that the BRI is seen as an opportunity to accelerate infrastructure development and foster economic growth. But to achieve that goal, the government needs to actively negotiate fair terms with China and navigate Philippine domestic politics with possibly clashing interest groups. We also see that small states are very much capable of shaping how they want the BRI to turn out, but equally and also more importantly, they are also accountable with how the projects are going to turn out, if they will be successful or not. I also want to point out that I'm in no way saying that the Philippine response is flawless. I'm just trying to share these experiences. This is what has happened and what is happening. And I think it is in these phases, it is in these stages, involving these actors, that these aspects build the spaces wherein small states can maneuver more strategically, produce informed and empowered responses to the BRI. Finally, the Philippine experience shows that a small state can shape its BRI experiences by negotiating terms with China and interacting with various groups within the country with different agenda. I also want to point out that there is value in delving into the complexity of a small state's BRI experience, as it can provide insights to other small states engaging with China. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to our Q&A session.
Thank you so much, Darlene. Thank you very much for your intervention. And you brought up something very, very relevant, and that is how small states, I mean, Philippines, and there are several others around the world. And we look at countries like China, which are big states, and we talk about how the relationship can be balanced that much further, how we can go about making it a win-win situation, mutually beneficial. And the Philippines has done that. We've noticed that. This is the country that has had a checkered relationship with a country like China in the past, and it's interesting to watch developments and how things are being taken forward. And I guess one of the most important things there is strategizing. And that's something that we've seen happening in the Philippines at the moment. So thank you very much for your intervention once again. So we are open now for questions and answers. We have time for that, and all our speakers are with us. We invite participants who wish to raise a question, seek clarification, opinions, views that we may take on board. We can go about and do that right now. So we've had so many speakers touching on varied aspects of global governance, looking at it from a much bigger perspective. We heard from Dr. Khosla, from Suryakanta, from Aarushi, from Benjamin, Krishna, Damni, Sri Lakshmi, and Darlene. And it is time now. If we have any questions, if we have clarifications, views, opinions, and that's one of the most important aspects of discussions of this nature, where we are able to share such opinions and also make the connection there in terms of understanding the bigger picture of global governance and how it impacts countries, how it is impacting all of us at the end of the day. So you are free to type in your question in the chat group, in the chat box, and we can move to you, we can recognize you, and we can listen to the question. So who would like to go first? Even amongst the speakers, if you do have clarifications you wish to seek from other speakers, you're more than welcome to do that right now. This is the time for that. So until we get, yes.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes, please, Benjamin. I wanted to come back to you at some point too. Yes, please.
Yeah, the first question is for Aarushi. Aarushi, who talked about COVID-19 and the legitimacy crisis in WHO and World Health Organization. And I would like to hear from her about United States behavior to the World Health Organization. You know, Trump especially. Yeah, Trump say he don't want to support anymore World Health Organization. But of course, we are doing this pandemic. And even if for the vaccine, Trump say he will not, of course, support WHO, but the vaccine share everywhere in the world. And of course, when Trump, United States, is just saying that we are not supporting WHO, of course, is China, of course, trying to cover the gap or the empty of the United States in the WHO. And my question for you is, how do you look at that? situation. How do you think about it? And can you tell us a little bit about the future? How what is your point about the future of WHO and in this like, competition between the United States and China?
Thanks,
Thank
Benjamin. Aarushi, there's also a question that's coming from YouTube, which is also focusing on your area. How do you assess the role of the UN or WHO in post-COVID world? So you can maybe refer to both references in your response.
So thank you, sir. Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Benjamin, for asking me this question. I would like to answer, first of all, in relation with US, as you said, that I think what US is doing right now, it is shifting the blame. The withdrawal, which is, it said that, you know, we are withdrawing from the World Health Organization because of the kind of biasness it is showing towards China, and Chinese control over the organization has increased. So I would say that, you know, US is withdrawing from China just on the basis of that, since they were not able to control their figures. So, you know, there's something called shifting the blame, which is working. You need to blame somebody else for the situation, not yourself. So I think, Benjamin, I think that I have answered your question. So I really believe that it's the shifting of blame which is working there. And the other question, so can you please, let me just read.
Yeah.
I think we need to understand this fact that it is an unprecedented situation for both United Nations and the World Health Organization. And certainly we can say that, you know, their role is going to, we can say this, that their role is going to decrease, but in reality, their role is going to increase, because we need cooperation in dealing with this pandemic. For suppose if China did not provide us with reliable information, so maybe still we can say that obviously we haven't controlled this pandemic, but whatever have happened, whatever little information that we've got, it's just because of the cooperation of the states, and it would be needed. You can't just withdraw from it, or you just can't, you know, say that, you know, their role is not going to be there in the future. You need cooperation. So cooperation would be there, and their role is going to be enhanced, even though you can say that, you know, it's not going to be, but it is going to be, and we need to certainly believe that we need the cooperation of these international organizations in these times. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Aarushi. Pavan Kumar has a question for Krishna. Krishna, what future do you see for the COVID during with these possible regulations? If you could respond to that, Krishna.
Hello.
Yes.
Well, in regards to the regulation, it's more or less doesn't be like, if you see with the regulation, then there is a dysfunctional working of the dispute settlement at the WTO. So I think that's not the major concern. The concern is that if some company, they are able to produce it first, so who will be assessing it the first? So if the country comes and impose some restriction for their, you know, for the use of their own people, then there is a difficulty in regards to the regulation, because if we do not have a very well-functioning international system or international organization, then it is not possible for to have a rules or regulation which can ensure the accessibility for the vaccine. But I think that won't be lasting for long, because it will be just a point of time for a short period, when you know, the first is comes into the market, and then, you know, it goes for the, you know, longer, you know, the production, then it will be accessible to everyone, but then there will be prices, how much they are charging. So it all depends upon the pricing discrimination, because the if this is a new patent, then there will be the patent regulation which might be there, but there is a regulation concern can be removed by issuing a compulsory licensing, like in many other cases where the country like Israel have some essential medicine. So I think the hurdles are not the main concern. Main is the, like, how can it be produced and distributed to the country who really needs it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Krishna. Maybe Dr. Khosla, maybe bring you on board here to respond to the next question that is being asked. Banura is asking the question, and it's a very valid point. It is, he's talking about failure in the system of democracy. And he's saying democracy is better than models of oligarchy or dictatorship systems as such. In the context of COVID, it was seen that China handled the crisis much better than a more democratic country like those of the United States or maybe one founded in the European Union. Where did they go wrong? What happened? If you could come on board there, Dr. Khosla, in responding to that question.
I guess China is one doesn't know really if their data is correct or not. A, B, you do not know that many during this COVID period, it's also said that women leaders have performed much better, like New Zealand, Germany, and they have performed much better. So you just can't say that dictatorship is going to enhance because there are other problems which come with this thing. So if people are oppressed in a certain way, if they are, for example, every country has a history. So if that is happening, I would not agree. I'll still stick with a democracy where people have a voice and they have they can look after things for themselves rather than a government or a party ruling the government, because lately we have had a tendency in these kinds of states. So I guess they might have been, but one doesn't really know if the data they are giving is true. So that's also one question. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Khosla. Damni, if we can come to you for just a moment, because you also talked about this global partnership building and how we can go about getting that much more out of the equation. Damni, if you would like to reflect on that as well, in terms of looking at the bigger picture, irrespective of the system of governance or the style of government within a country, do you think partnerships have got to be established with what we're seeing right now, especially with the pandemic, especially with COVID? Is it a time for segregation, or in terms of moving forward, how would you want to respond to that? Yes, Damni. Bit of feedback, but
Yeah.
I think we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, so I was just mentioning that even in the paper, I have argued for the fact that because very specifically, the COVID-19 pandemic is not working within the national boundaries, right? It is transcending the national boundaries, and that's why our response has to be something which talks about a collaborative partnership. Obviously, I do understand that there are a lot many loopholes in which the international organizations work through. For example, the UN or the WHO. There have been a preference of these international organizations where they focus, they kind of give an advantage and the advantage to the powerful countries, and it has been there, surely. But the point is that if at this point of time we kind of ignore the organizations which call for international collaborative partnership, even in that situation, if we kind of work within the national boundaries, I think even then the powerful countries have the kind of power to actually dictate what these least developing countries or the less powerful countries have to do. They can actually dictate the terms of trade, terms of agreement. They can actually develop vaccines for their own countries and not pass it on to the less powerful countries. So even without even if in case we do not have like a proper established international organization, this kind of a power structure remains over there. It is not to say that the international organizations are fair, but we can rely on them for some amount of of an equality and a kind of a balance. And it is only in that sense that I wanted to say that we need to focus on a framework which was actually built upon the consent and agreement of around 193 member countries. So the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which was signed in 2015, that was to the consent of the 193 member countries, and they accepted certain goals, and these goals kind of reflect development, sustainable development, equity in terms of economic, political, cultural factors. So I think if we take the essence of those principles and implement it at the COVID-19 period, it is going to help. Uh, though I'm keeping this in mind that yes, the international organizations can also dictate and the powerful countries can dictate you well, but if we work on these principles, there's no harm in these principles. Those principles can actually help in reviving our country-specific situation as well. And anyway, the powerful countries are at an edge where they have better chances to invest in research and development and hence developing a vaccine also for themselves. So there needs a negotiation between the countries, and if we have something to like look back for helping us in this international collaboration, in this global cooperation, I think that is going to benefit. It is at least going to be beneficial as compared to an anarchical form of nation states where the richer countries or the powerful ones can simply dictate the rest of us.
Thank you, Damni. Darlene, if you would like to chip in as well in terms of responding to that particular question, in response to what was just raised there by Banura, do you think the situation in a country like China was handled well, and as opposed to, let's say, a more developed country, let's say countries which are categorized as being developed countries, how would you like to weigh in on that particular equation? Where do you think such countries went wrong in their response, and why have they still, some of them still are grappling with this issue, despite the level of development, the level of progression within their countries? What do you think went wrong there?
Thank you very much, sir, for sharing the question to me. So I think there are lots of factors at play, and it goes. I'd have to say that it goes beyond the types of systems. As for democratic, I think there are various factors that are at play when we look into the readiness of the country's public health system. The sense of urgency that the leadership has given into the situation at the earlier stages, because I think timing is very important. I also think listening to the international announcement, for example, abiding by the World Health Organization. I think these are things that different states responded with differently in different ways. So I'm not sure if the type of system is really what we want to look into there, because there are also democratic states who have been able to curb the number of their cases in their countries. And I'm not sure what are the factors that would make a response go wrong. But for the case of some states that the response went right, what they did was they're already ready for they have institutions in place. For example, they have disease ready for a pandemic. They have disease institutions. They're quick to come up with programs, contact tracing, mass testing, and I think this would vary per country, and that's what I think, sir.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. And just if you can move very briefly to Sri Lakshmi. Sri Lakshmi, if you could just take a minute to wrap it up and tell us in terms of, you looked at it from a very different perspective in understanding global warming, what is happening right now. This is something that is impacting all of us, irrespective of the debate, irrespective of those who are for or against it, or who believe it's happening or feel it's not happening. It certainly is something that we have to contend with on a daily basis. How positive are you? How favorable do you think the situation is to actually see a change? We've seen so much of damage being done in the last 50 years and less than that maybe. How positive are you in terms of the outlook for the future?
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Thank you for the question. In fact, I was going to pose that question to Damini. All right. So I believe right now it's actually going to be challenging, because with the EIA 2020, that is a whole different concept, but with that draft being there right now, proposed by the Environment Ministry, So with the environmental impact assessment draft, it kind of eases the environmental laws and makes clearances more easy for companies to get. And that can actually be detrimental in a way. So I do believe that there are challenges that we face, but I still want to be optimistic because the response that we've seen from the public, from the students and from the environmentalists has been huge. All right, so we've had people taking it to court, we've had cases being fought, and we actually see a very, very positive change that is happening amongst people. And in a democracy, people's voice is important. So if we're going to use this voice to raise concerns regarding the environment, and if we make sure that the government does not just do what it wants to, but be accountable to the people as it is supposed to be, then we can actually see a very positive change.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Srilakshmi.
Yes.
I think this is where we have to start wrapping things up because time-wise, we have reached the completion of our session. Thank you very much to all of our panelists. Thank you very much, Dr. Khosla. Suryakanta for coming. He wasn't able to join us for the Q&A, but he did join us for the presentation. Aarushi, Benjamin, Krishna, Damni, Srilakshmi, and Darlene, thank you very much for your interventions and taking up a very timely topic. We're looking at global governance. We're at a very crucial juncture. We're at a very important position. We always say we're at a very crucial juncture. We always seem to think that we are at a very important position. And why is that? Because change is within reach, change is within our hands, and we should be doing something for that rather than sitting back and waiting for someone else to do it. And that is something that we've seen organizations like NIICE and Dr. Pramod Jaiswal exactly doing. In terms of actually walking the talk and going that much further, increasing the discussion, creating platforms for debate of this nature, and making sure that if any form of intervention, any form of message, any form of expression is going to be taken note of, is going to be included, is going to be part of the dialogue. And this is very important because remaining silent, remaining on the sidelines, and then complaining at the end of the day is not going to work. We need to be a part and parcel of the solution rather than being a part and parcel of the problem. So hopefully through this particular panel, this is a much bigger program that is being organized over several days. This is just one panel, but of course, I certainly hope, Dr. Jaiswal, that we've been able to do some justice to the topic, looking at global governance, because at the end of the day, we have one planet. Something Ban Ki-moon would always say was, we don't have a plan B because we don't have a planet B. And that is very, very relevant for us to note. There's no fallback plan. There's no alternate option for us at the end of the day. We've got to make sure that this particular time, this particular program, whatever the program may be, wherever it may be in the world, is going to be something that is going to do something positive for all of us, and not just for us, but certainly for future generations as well. So thank you very much to all of our panelists, for all of our participants, and very much to the organizers as well for putting this panel together. Dr. Pramod, over to you, and then we can wrap up this session.
Gayatri?
Yes, sir. Distinguished Chair, speakers, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of the 21st session. It's my honor to propose a vote of thanks on behalf of NICE to all those who have graced us with our presence and contributed their parts to make the event a resounding success. First of all, we would like to express our profound gratitude and sincere thanks to George Cooke for agreeing to chair and moderate the session today. A sincere thanks also goes to all our speakers for being a part of the event and delivering such a comprehensive and convincing presentation. We are really honored to have all the speakers with us here today. We would like to acknowledge our gratitude to our friends from the diplomatic community, experts, academia, media, and different organizations. Finally, I must mention our deep sense of appreciation for our audience who have participated in the webinar and those who are watching this live on our YouTube channel. Thank you for your valuable time and attention and for making the session productive with your queries. We're truly honored to have you with us and hope to stay connected with you in future as well. It's really been a pleasure. Also, do join us at our next session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gayatri. And